What needs to happen for them not to win the title this year?
Quite a bit. I mean, I expect them to be the favorite by a lot. I think they're obviously the best team, and whatever happens in the regular season, they tend to coast. They tend to kind of take things easy. But with 5 All-Stars in that lineup, we don't know how DeMarcus Cousins is going to look coming back, but I don't expect him to be too far off of the player he was. At least physically, his role, I think, is going to be a little bit different. But, if they suffer an injury to Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, even one that's minor like we saw in 2016 and 2018, where Steph slips on a wet spot and tweaks his knee or something like that, and then one of Houston, Boston, or Toronto really clicks and finds their stride, I could see it happening then, but aside from that, it's going to be really hard to knock these guys off.
How good can this Lakers team actually be?
Well, I think people are paying a lot of attention to that meme team, like you mentioned, Lance Stevenson, JaVale McGee, Rajon Rondo, Michael Beasley, all these guys they signed in the offseason. To me, the guys who are going to be more important to their success are the Josh Harts, Brandon Ingram, Lonzo Ball, Kyle Kuzma. These younger guys, I think, are going to play much bigger roles than these veterans that they signed. And look, for the price they got them and for the roles that they're going to play, I don't think they're bad pickups. You add in the fact that they were all one-year deals, so they can either trade them this season at the trade deadline or let them walk next season and clear cap space to sign another big free agent. I don't think these signings were too bad, as much as people criticized them online maybe and kind of made fun of that mix that they have. It'll be interesting to watch. I think certainly it'll lead to some memes on the internet like we're all expecting. But really, when you talk about the success on the court, it's going to be those younger guys and, of course, LeBron James that contribute to that.
100% possible.
You talked about Ingram's upside. I think it's just a question of how quickly he gets there. If he's a star this year, then maybe they are a Western Conference Finals team. If it takes them a few years, maybe they lose in the first or second round, and it takes them a little while to kind of break through.
We can go really quickly on this one. Carmelo to the Rockets. Does that make a difference in the Western Conference race at all to you?
Ultimately, no. I don't think he's playable on defense in the playoffs, especially against the teams that the Rockets really need to beat. Well, you talked about Kawhi's injury and him coming back. I think you could say the same thing about Gordon Hayward. I mean, we just don't know what he's going to look like. Devastating injury, I think, probably worse than Kawhi Leonard's, although we don't really know what Kawhi was going through totally. But maybe it takes longer than a lot of people expect to kind of get that mix to work together with Horford, Kyrie, Hayward, figuring out who gets the ball in which situations. I think Tatum, I like him a lot. Maybe he regresses just a little bit, or at least doesn't improve the way that most sophomores do, because he was just so good as a rookie that it's hard to project that linear growth for him. And then Toronto, I really like the Raptors, and I think people are sleeping on them just a little bit, and maybe not from any fault of Boston's own, but just by virtue of Toronto being as good as they are.
Make your case for Rookie of the Year.
I think it's Luka Doncic. I think he's the best rookie in this class by a long shot. I thought he was the best guy in the draft pretty easily. I think he's in a great situation in Dallas. He's an extremely smart player, extremely skilled player, and an extremely proven player. He was the best player in the second best league in the entire world last season, and he's only 19 years old. People talk a lot about athleticism, length, and these kind of physical traits going into the draft, but I think I'm not entirely sure why we don't talk about feel and passing and skill and IQ in the same way, because I think that's just as important to building a superstar as any of those other qualities. And I think Luka Doncic has those qualities. He could struggle athletically for sure. He's a young guy who's not in the best of shape, but I do think he's in a great situation in Dallas and is going to surprise some people with just how ready he is to contribute at the NBA level.
The breakout player this season will be who?
I'm going to go with Pascal Siakam. A really athletic, long player who's probably going to come off the bench for the Raptors, but I think could be the piece that unlocks that team at their best, and a team that could, I think, win the championship.
Breakout team.
I like the Denver pick. I'm going to go with the Utah Jazz, though. I like their depth, their continuity, their talent. They're getting Rudy Gobert back. They'll have Jay Crowder in the fold for a full season. Donovan Mitchell should take a step forward. I think the Jazz are going to get the 3 seed in the West.
You didn't even mention your guy.
Joe Ingles.
Joe Ingles.
My favorite player.
Your favorite player in the NBA, Joe Ingles. All right, I asked you guys both sides of the Celtics winning the East conversation. I want you what you believe will happen. Ben Ladner, we will start with you.
I like the Raptors. I think they're a low 60s win team. I think Boston could take a little bit of time to get things together. I think Kawhi will come back the player, maybe not exactly that he was, but close to it. And I like their depth a lot and their versatility on defense.
To win, if they are going to be challenged, it's either going to be in the second round by Houston, or it's going to be in the finals against either Milwaukee, Toronto, Boston, Philly, whoever you like out of that group. The Boogie injury, I don't know that it actually changes that much for them. I think, they've proven they can win a championship with only 4 All-Stars as opposed to 5. And, it's such a complicated question because, we've seen these flashes on the one hand from Boogie where it's like, oh my God, he can beast any defender inside in the post. He can go to work. He can stretch the floor. Great passer. Do a lot of the things that like David West and Andrew Bogut have done in years past. But then you also see these flashes where it's like, okay, he can't really survive on defense. He can't guard in space. what's going to happen when you get him switched on a James Harden, on an Eric Gordon, Chris Paul, like you said. So we've seen both, I think the positives and the negatives of having him. And ultimately, I think he's been a wash, kind of the net outcome. I think he's provided, about replacement level value for the Warriors, which for a guy coming off an Achilles injury is not bad. But I don't think it changes the calculus much for them or for the rest of the league in terms of how you beat them, how you attack them, and maybe the ultimate outcome of the season.
What is the blueprint for the Rockets to beat them? Can they take down the Warriors?
James Harden has to make shots. I think that's as simple as that. We've
lot of
seen a lot of them. And he has so far through 2 games against Utah. If he can make shots, we've seen in the playoffs before, the shot's not falling and the Rockets are kind of sunk. If he's not hitting. Chris Paul, he kind of lifted them a little bit last season and kept them in it. But really, I think everything falls at the feet of James Harden. The Rockets go as he goes. And if the Warriors just can't guard him and if he's hitting shots, there's not a whole lot you can do. And I think the Rockets are good enough on defense to kind of cobble together enough stops and to defend the Warriors adequately that if Harden just goes supernova, they're going to be able to outscore the Warriors.
Are you worried about those 2 teams, Philly and Toronto specifically?
I'm not worried about Toronto. I trust their talent. I trust their versatility, what they did in the regular season. They have a guy who, when he's at his best, could be the best player in the Eastern Conference. Philly is a little more complicated. We just haven't seen their stars kind of get enough time to gel with one another. They tried to microwave their team and speed up the process and make everything happen this year. And it may well work. They have a ton of talent, probably the best on paper starting lineup in the entire Eastern Conference. I just don't know if they've had the time to kind of coalesce and become the team that they need to become. Brooklyn came out and punched them in the mouth in game 1. I liked the way that they responded in game 2. They're not an easy team to manage and to coach, I don't think. They have just the skill sets of their best players, the way they fit together. I think it takes a little bit of adjustments in the rotation, a little bit more coaching than it would for an average team. Butler, to me, is maybe the most interesting wild card in the entire Eastern Conference because, to me, Butler is the guy that can kind of swing things their way. If he can find the right role for him on that team, they're as dangerous as anybody.
And what is Denver's realistic ceiling?
It's tough to say because I think Jokic has certain limitations that in the regular season you can work around, you can scheme around them, specifically his ability to defend in space, which is not great. In the regular season, they built a top 10-ish defense. Despite that, they were able to use Paul Millsap as a help defender, kind of cobble together a good defense despite his limitations. In the playoffs, it's a little bit tougher to scheme around that because you're going to run into teams who can, just kind of get you out one-on-one, like, look at the Rockets. He's not at a point yet in his career, and maybe he does get there, where you can really build a playoff, championship-level defense around him. I can't get with you on the second-best point guard in the East point, but I guess the point that I would make kind of dovetails with D'Angelo Russell, and that's the repercussions of the playoffs this offseason. If the Nets get past the 76ers in the first round, are the Nets incentivized to offer him a max contract? If the Raptors are eliminated early, if the Celtics are eliminated early, how does that affect Kawhi Leonard and Kyrie Irving's decisions this summer? Do they stay? Do they go elsewhere? If the Warriors don't win the title, does Kevin Durant stay? Does he go? What about Klay Thompson? Draymond Green is about to, he'll be a free agent next summer. Do they try to get out in front of that? It's just, I think all these teams, if they lose early, they're really in position where their teams could be not necessarily broken up, but they could see some key pieces leave. And we're going to see a lot of moving parts this summer. We're going to see superstars on the move. We're going to see superstars teaming up. We're going to see teams in position to try and go out and get a couple of those guys. And I just think these playoffs are going to have a lot to do, with what happens this summer, just based on how these teams perform. Yeah, maybe I'm missing something with Boston. I don't think you're alone in thinking that they're the team to beat in the East. And I've seen a lot of people share that opinion. I don't know that it was just carelessness and not caring in the regular season. I think they still have a lot to figure out before they can get to best team in the East status. And I don't know that they have the time to figure it out. It's a lot like the Sixers, where I see a lot of not only off-court dysfunction with Kyrie saying some of the stuff he's said, just kind of the malaise that bogged that team down during the regular season, but on-court, Jaylen Brown and Gordon Hayward are still kind of figuring out where they fit in. Marcus Smart is injured. When he comes back, you have to mesh him back in. Marcus Morris has not played well as of late. And I think they have a lot of pieces that are not to the level they need to be for them to compete for a championship. And, I think the East is a 2-team league. I really do.
What's a team that people can look out for?
I guess I would say the Toronto Raptors. I think statistically, there isn't an argument for anyone but the Bucks to come out of the East. They've been one of the best regular season teams in recent memory. They've way outperformed, or they've underperformed their point differential. You know, they've been one of the 3 best offenses and 3 best defenses in the league all season. It's honestly kind of a minor miracle that they only won 60 games. I think they're better than that, better than their record indicates. But there's just this part of me that feels like the Raptors could come for their throats. I really like the Raptors' top end talent. I really like their versatility. They can play any style, I think, against any opponent. If they get into a series with the Warriors, I like their ability to downsize and play lineups that can switch across multiple positions. Like I said earlier, I think Kawhi Leonard, when he's at his best, is neck and neck with Giannis for the best player in the Eastern Conference. I just really like what this team is putting together. So personally, I'm rooting for a Raptors-Bucks Eastern Conference Finals. And I think either one of those teams, if they're really clicking and working, kind of at their peak level, they have a chance to unseat the Warriors in the finals.
Western Conference Finals.
I think Houston can give Golden State a series. I don't think they'll win. I think this is a season that has been destined all season to fall short. I think Golden State and whoever you want to pick out of Portland, Denver, and San Antonio, I'll go with Portland and Golden State. My head tells me I need to go with Milwaukee. They're the better team. They're better statistically. They've had the better season. I just have this feeling with Toronto. So I'm going to say Golden State over Toronto in 7.
So if you want to pick one thing that's gone wrong, shooting.
Yeah, and I think you see that dovetail into a lot of other aspects of the offense too, right? I mean, so much of Indiana's success in the middle of the year was about getting Romeo Langford with the ball in his hands, playing in space, working in the pick and roll, and he'd have those lanes to the basket where he's such a good finisher, he was a good passer. And now, with no spacing on the floor for Indiana, opponents are just backing off of the non-shooters like Justin Smith, Zach McRoberts, guys who aren't going to make shots. Opponents are just not guarding them. They're clogging the lane. They're taking away Romeo Langford's driving lanes. And because of that, we're seeing not only Romeo Langford have trouble scoring, but the rest of the options on the team just aren't able to get anything going because, the root of the offense is just being shut off. Yeah, I agree. I think making the NCAA tournament is probably the most realistic goal. And I think the Big Ten tournament is going to be really key for this team as well because the Big Ten is the type of conference where there's just so many good teams, or I guess in this case, mediocre teams, kind of bunched up in the middle of the conference. So if you can get in there, if you can just get, a decent seed in the Big Ten tournament, make some noise in Chicago and finish with a top 2, top 4 finish in that tournament, maybe that kind of propels you forward into the NCAAs. And then, we've seen crazier things happen before than a team struggling in the middle of the season kind of turn it on in the NCAAs and make a run there. I don't know that will happen for sure. I would be a little surprised if it did happen, but if you can get there, anything can happen, I guess.
But this is also...
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. And kind of like I said earlier, teams are just laying off of those non-threats. That's why it's so important that the role players not only knock down shots, but just take the shots. That's why you need Zach McRoberts, even if he's not hitting at a high clip, Justin Smith, guys like that, just to pose threats. If they catch the ball and they're open, shoot the ball just to make the defense respect you. And right now, they're just not getting a lot of respect from the defense. And so, like I said earlier, that's just causing so many problems for Indiana where their best players don't have any room to work. And I don't care how good you are, like you said, unless you're LeBron James, if you don't have any room to operate, if you don't have any space to do what you're good at, you're not going to have any success. And that's kind of the problem that Indiana is going up against right now. Yeah, you talk about Rob Finney. It seemed like when Indiana was really clicking, he was kind of the steadying force out there on the court for them. He just kind of brought this stability, kind of a calmness to the offense. And that he just hasn't had that same effect recently. And maybe that's the injuries working. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's a bunch of different factors. But it just seems like he hasn't really been that same guy, like you said. I think maybe part of that problem is maybe they've become too over-reliant on that pick and roll with Romeo Langford and Juwan Morgan. I'm an advocate for sure of putting your 2 best players in an action, kind of letting things run their course from there because usually you're going to get good stuff out of that. But lately, teams have just been keying in on that pick and roll, and they've been able to stop it pretty easily. To me, it comes down to the guys working around that pick and roll, the guys working off of it, the Justin Smiths, the Zach McRoberts, the Rob Finneys. How do you activate them away from the ball or on the ball and make them threats within the offense? Maybe you use Justin Smith more as a roll man and let him kind of get going downhill toward the basket so defenses have to guard him. Maybe you design backdoor cuts for Zach McRoberts to make him, more of a part of the offense. Maybe it's Rob Finney trying to get him going downhill a little bit more often. I think you need to get these kind of secondary and tertiary threats working, find that third scorer. Not only do you give him more opportunities, not only do you maximize the role players themselves, but the opportunity that creates for the rest of the team.
if you have to respect Justin Smith coming down the paint and you have to bring an extra defender, that opens up that backside corner for maybe an open three if you can kick the ball out there. Maybe Romeo Langford has a little bit more space when the guy guarding the pick and roll, who's guarding the screener, can't just double team the ball every time. He actually has to stick on the roll man. Yeah, well, Indiana's getting spread out right now defensively. Teams are putting shooters on the floor. Michigan, we can expect to see this tomorrow night. We saw this in the first game against Michigan. They're just putting 5 shooters on the floor. Sometimes, teams don't have all 5, but they'll put multiple shooting threats on the floor. And the way Indiana's defense is designed, with the pack line, you've got guys who are it's more about shutting off the paint than it is about closing out on shooters. And so a consequence of that is that teams can get open catch and shoot threes against the pack line defense if a team doesn't have it exactly down. So to me, if you can simplify the defensive scheme a little bit, I know it's important to instill the defensive principles and kind of get the institutional knowledge rolling for Archie Miller's tenure, but if you're looking for direct results, trying to maximize the defensive personnel you have, I think just adjusting the defense slightly to make it a little simpler, a little easier on all 5 guys on the floor is a place to start.
Most important glue piece. I have a feeling who you're not going to say now.
I'll say Justin Smith. I think he's the best and most important defender on this team. And if there's one candidate that appears kind of poised to emerge as that third scoring option, I think it's got to be him.
Who or what has been the biggest disappointment?
I think this one is easy. Evan Fitzner next.
Yeah, I'll elaborate just a little bit. I think the theoretical version of Fitzner is great. A stretch 5 who can space the floor, knock down some shots, open up the court for the rest of Indiana's players, particularly Romeo Langford, driving to the basket. But too often you just see him float. He doesn't really play that role. He barely even stands behind the three-point line, let alone knock down shots recently. He's just had a really tough time, and right now he's just out of the rotation.
Yeah. Last question. Who has been the biggest surprise, pleasant surprise, and yes, you have to pick one?
I'll highlight Al Durham. I'm not totally surprised by what he's doing this year because I was pretty optimistic on him going into the year, but he's shooting the ball really well. He's a really dynamic playmaker, getting to the basket. He can finish at the basket with both hands. He's a pesky defender with some length who can guard multiple positions. I really like what he's been for Indiana, and it looks like he could play an even more prominent role next season if you're kind of projecting forward a little bit.